Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing all right. We're here on a actually sunny Friday afternoon. Trying to get this in before the week's over.
You know, middle of May. We're creeping ever closer to summer, as we are here on a Friday afternoon. But yeah, we are here today, getting in another one of our deep dives. We're going to be talking about Savion Williams and Micah Robinson. Why the weird combination, you might ask? Well, because it made sense to combine all the other guys, and then these two were the ones that were left. We wanted to do Barron Sorrell and Colin Oliver together, just to do pass rushers together, which is why we're not doing Savion Williams and Barron Sorrell. We wanted to do Anthony Belton and John Williams together, since they're both offensive linemen. And if you want to check that out, we just did that last week, so go check that in your feed. And then it made sense to us to do Warren Brinson with, Nazir Stackhouse and Dumas Johnson, who are both UDFAs. So we're going to do those UDFAs with him as well, since, run stuffers. But anyway, like I said, we are here today to do Savion Williams and Micah Robinson. So we're going to be talking all about that. We're also going to be talking a little bit about some Packers related news, some contract maybe disputes on the horizon. We're going to talk about the schedule release a little bit, just our brief thoughts on that, because, we already kind of knew who the Packers were playing, and this isn't a whole lot more information, but it is something. But
this is the thing about the NFL. Is like the amount of actual news was so minimal, and yet they announced that they would announce it a couple weeks ago. And then they just dribble it out in little leaks over and over again to keep everybody's attention.
That's what's funny to me, is like they have a whole big event as the announcement, but like we know like 80% of it by the time it's announced. Like we know like almost all of they're like, oh yeah, week 1, like the Packers are going to be playing the Lions. Like, okay, it's like by the time like 4:00 ran around, I had already seen like someone had put together all the leaks, and it was like all but like 2 games like they had already figured out.
Yeah, I think maybe the big reveal everybody's waiting for are the little scheduled videos.
Yeah, those are fun.
That the teams put out.
The Packers one was weird.
I watched it. Had kind of that.
It's very Lynchian,
horror, vibe.
Very,
very not quite right, but surreal.
But before we get into any of that, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear, subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment. We would appreciate it. Tell a friend. Follow us on Blue Sky for updates on when we're putting new episodes out. Content from other Packers content creators, Packers news, Packers roster moves. That's at Father Son Packer on Blue Sky. But yeah, we're on YouTube, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, etc. Wherever you can find podcasts, you can find us. But just the quick spiel there, we'll get on into it. Dad, let's start off with some news, though, for Green Bay before we get into these deep dives. And we'll be doing these deep dives for the next couple episodes as well. We still have a few more to go. We already did one on Matthew Golden. We already did Anthony Belton and John Williams, so check those out from the past couple of weeks. But, Dad, some news. Unfortunately, some contract news, and not great contract news. And that is on the front of Elton Jenkins, who, if you have not heard, good listeners, is projected to move to center this year from left guard. And with that happening, he is currently not at workouts because it seems like he wants some more contract stability, as originally reported by Jason Wilde and then confirmed by Rob Domofsky of ESPN. He's not at workouts, which means he's foregoing $500,000 in workout bonuses, so good chunk of change. Wants some more financial stability as he moves to center. It's one of those things where when he was at guard, he could be projected to get a third contract with a good chunk of more money than he is going to be at center. Centers are generally lower paid than guards are. So if he plays center this year, he pretty much wants some more stability. Now, he does have 2 years left on his deal, but he doesn't really have a whole lot of money guaranteed left on his deal. And right now he's going to have a $24.8 million cap hit in 2026 for Green Bay, and only 4.8 of that is dead. So they could cut him going into the 2026 season and save $20 million in cap. And it just seems like, with the move to center being a move that is not very financial, not a whole lot of financial incentive there for him, and with him being a cut candidate in 2026, he seems to want some either restructure, some more guaranteed money, maybe an extension that would give him some more stability, given the fact that, he might end up being a free agent if the Packers cut him next year as a center, making less money than he would as a guard. And so if he's going to make that move to center, he wants more stability. Dad, thoughts on this? Obviously not ideal to have a guy, who's moving to a new position, who's going to be really key, missing some of the practices in the offseason that could really use him. But at the same time, you kind of understand where he's coming from as well, where he wants a little bit more stability. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because he's looking at, I'm, one of the linchpins to this line. So what about me?
Yeah,
and
he's sacrificing.
It's going to get less money.
Mm-hmm.
That he's already gone. I kind of stepped down in money once, as it were. Though they did give him, going from tackle to guard, and now going from guard to center. So you can see his perspective.
Yeah, you can see his perspective, and they're asking him to move to a position that's making less money, and so he wants something to kind of make up for that. When he signed that initial contract, he had incentives in there where if he played a certain number of snaps at tackle, he would be getting paid more money, and so this is kind of in that same vein. So you understand it. Hopefully, they can come to something where maybe they tack on a year, maybe they make some more of that money guaranteed. Historically, the Packers have not wanted to do third contracts with players, and when they have, it hasn't exactly gone well. Bakhtiari being one, Kenny Clark last year being another. Those two did not end up going very well, although we'll see if Kenny Clark has a bounce-back year this year. Hopefully he does. But so I'd be surprised if they did like a full extension. Maybe not if they did like just tacked on a year, maybe. Or I think more likely they're going to just end up making more of his salary guaranteed next year is my guess. What are your thoughts there in terms of a possible resolution?
Right. I think maybe the compromise is going to be they'll tack on a year and guarantee more of next year's money and tack on a year to spread it out.
Yeah, and I wouldn't hate that. I don't know if you want to give him a third contract. He is already 30. He was old when he was coming out as a rookie. So it's one of those things where hopefully there's a happy medium for them. In terms of other Packers-related news, that's definitely going to be the one to watch. But the other is that there are some roster moves. Quarterback Taylor Elgersma was signed with offensive lineman Marcus Hayes released. So that's going to be a fourth quarterback on the roster. He's the guy out of Canada who they liked, had in on a visit, had in for a workout tryout. Had some interest from some other teams, but it looks like the Packers are able to bring him in. And then also signed wide receiver Jaden Janke. I believe that's how it's pronounced. More of a, he was a 2024 UDFA, I believe. Bit of a, I would say, camp body. Hopefully make the practice squad for him. Like that's like kind of what his goal is probably coming here. And so with that, the 90-man roster is full, including also 91st player International Pathway Program player Alex Hale. So that's full. Any thoughts on any of these signings? Mostly just camp bodies. It seems like maybe Elgersma takes that third spot from Clifford. That's a possibility, I suppose. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, that seems to be, in the realm of possibility. I don't think there's any reason why that couldn't be the case. And some people have said he has a good arm. I don't know if he's very mobile, but he hadn't played any U.S. football.
Yeah,
played only,
and
only
it's practically a different sport because the guys can get a running start. It's a bigger, a much bigger field. It's really odd. Like I wonder where the origins of like it being so different came from. But anyway, that's a question for a different podcast. But Dad, let's move on to talking a little bit about this schedule for Green Bay. Because we did finally get the schedule release. We can run through it really quick here. As we're not going to go through the whole thing in terms of like what we think about every single one, but maybe just our main takeaways. But overall on the year, the Packers are set to start off the year at home for the first time under Matt LaFleur, which I think is a bit odd.
Took a while.
Yeah, right. Isn't it strange that, in his however many years now it is, he has not had a single home opener until this year. But anyway, they open it up at home versus the Lions, and then they go Thursday night Washington, then against Cleveland, then against Dallas, bye week in week 5, which we'll talk about in a second, then Cincinnati, Arizona, Pittsburgh, Carolina, Philadelphia on a Monday night, New York, Minnesota, Detroit on Thanksgiving, Chicago, Denver, Chicago, Baltimore, Minnesota. So we already knew the teams that they were playing, but that's just going to be the order of it. And I think we each have like a couple things written down that we found interesting about the schedule, maybe things to highlight. Dad, what was the first one that you had, though, that you wanted to discuss?
So the one thing I looked at, because you had looked at some other things, was whether, the idea of rest advantage or not. And so mostly it's pretty neutral for the Packers. I think their net rest advantage for the season is just one day. They get a rest advantage early and then have a rest disadvantage late. So I was trying to look at, what actually is the rest advantage, disadvantage? I mean, how much of it is meaningful? And I came across this study from, I think it's called Sportfolio Kings. Came out last May. So it didn't have last year's games, but had between 2000 and 2023. And a few of the big picture takeaways, the total net rest showed almost no correlation with win totals or season-long point differential. Rest advantages later in the year had less effect than those earlier in the year. So I think most people think that that would be the reverse. Their explanation is that maybe early rest you can actually do more coaching to make changes rather than at the end of the year. the shorter rest advantages, like between less than a week, between 1 day and 5 days, conferred basically no advantage in game point differential. So most of their analysis on game point differential for that game rather than season long. But a net rest advantage of 6 days or more, essentially playing an opponent after bye, did have a positive correlation on point differential for the week. So for this season, good for Green Bay against Cincinnati, bad for Green Bay against Philadelphia.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like even a mini bye of like playing on Thursday and then playing the next week on Sunday didn't seem to have that much of an advantage, even though you'd assume having those extra 3 days would help. But yeah, so the Packers, they're only playing one team coming off the opponent's bye, which is Philly on that Monday night, which is going to be a little bit tough. But especially playing a very good team coming off a bye, is obviously not ideal there. But only one team that they're playing will be having their bye the week before they play the Packers, and then the Packers will have one team where they are playing them after their bye. So
yeah, and then the biggest thing they found just to make that disadvantage against Philly against the Eagles. I almost said the Philly Eagles, even worse, is the strongest effect they reported was a cumulative net rest disadvantage or advantage. So like a 3-week rolling average net rest. And if that average is like 3 games or more, that's where they see the biggest effect on point differential. So a cluster of rest advantages or disadvantages make a big difference. So it's particularly bad against the Eagles because the Packers also have a 3-day rest disadvantage against the Steelers just 2 weeks earlier. So that's like 10 net rest disadvantage days. So a 3.3 average over those 3 weeks. And so just against a team that we really care about, that difference, I forget what the point differential might be. Maybe it's like 2 points worth.
Yeah.
Something like that.
It's not terrible in terms of a rest differential for the season. I think on the season, they're like 1 or 2 days total.
It's just one negative total for the whole season.
It depends. It depends when the Ravens game is, I think. Since that game has not been set when it is yet. So
whether that's a Saturday or Sunday.
And I think the Vikings are coming off of Thursday that year, or that week. So I think they lose one there. But so it depends when that game ends up being.
I think the only game that really matters or that really seem to make a difference are going to be the Bengals game and the Eagles game.
Yeah. And the thing that I wanted to just highlight is the first thing that popped to my mind when I saw it was like, ooh, that's an early bye. That's tough. Week 5 bye, the earliest it can be pretty much. But, I did want to go back and look, when was the are you able to win with an early bye, I guess was my question. Like, has a team ever won a Super Bowl with a bye this early? And I didn't have to go back very long, so that's kind of nice. The 2024 Eagles, just this past year, when they won the Super Bowl, had a Week 5 bye. Now, to be fair, they did rest their starters in Week 18, so they did kind of steal a week there. So that's something to keep in mind, is you're probably going to have to steal a week at the end if you want to make this work. So you're going to have to really capitalize on those weeks 1 to 17. But, since we've gone to a Week 18 regular season format, the 2024 Eagles had a Week 5 bye. The Chiefs in 2023 had a Week 10 bye. 2022 Chiefs had a Week 8 bye. And the 2021 Rams had a Week 11 bye. So 2 teams with byes in the front half of the schedule, 2 teams with byes in the back half of the schedule, and the Eagles last year having the same bye week as the Packers. So it's not, the end of the world to have a Week 5 bye. Obviously, it's not ideal.
Clearly
but if you think about
trending towards Week 5,
exactly. But if you think about last year, it probably would have benefited the Packers to have a Week 5 bye. What with Jordan Love dealing with that injury, it probably would have helped them out. And so you never know what the season is going to bring and whether or not Week 5 bye might help you or might hurt you. And so it's impossible to know at this point. There's too many variables, but other teams have made it work with a Week 5 bye. They've just had to steal a week at the end where they're able to rest some guys and have that work out that way. But it's not the end of the world. Obviously, it's not ideal. I think you'd ideally want your bye probably in that Week 11 slot where you need the end of the season and some guys are already dinged up and not have it quite as early and use it up that early. But it is what it is, and that was the first thing that jumped to my mind. And it did at least help me a little to look back and say, okay, the Eagles just did it last year at least. But yeah, what'd you have as your next thing, or do you have any thoughts?
That
on
was
the
the main. I mostly looked at the rest advantage, disadvantage, but you also about the whole divisional setup.
Yeah. That was the other thing, is it was weird the way the divisional games end up getting laid out. So the Packers play Week 1 versus the Lions. but then they don't play another division game for a very long time. And their other 5 divisional games are in the last 7 games of the year. So the whole NFC North might, end up getting decided in those last 7 weeks as the Packers play 5 of those games. And they might, that's the other thing is if you play well enough in the weeks before that, you could fully control your own destiny in the NFC North over those last 7 weeks and how you play there. You play the Bears twice in 3 weeks, which is a little bit weird. I think week 14 and week 16, if I remember correctly. So, I mean, that's a little bit odd. You don't see that super often. It happens, but it's not a super often thing. And
they also don't get really like their days out of those last, 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Their 2 non-division games are at Denver and against the Ravens. So it's not like they're getting a break.
It's a tough end of the schedule for sure. 5 of 7, and I think 4 of the last 6 are on the road as well, if I remember correctly. So that's tough as well. It's a tough schedule for sure. I will say though, one thing that the Packers do have going for them is they have the 7th fewest miles traveled in the schedule in the NFL this year, and they don't have any international games.
That's the biggie. Yeah, no international games. So it's like I've not liked
the international games.
Packers.
I mean, I love the spreading of the game. We love the popularity overseas. Love having the overseas fans. It has not gone well for Green Bay when they've gone overseas. It has not gone well for us.
Somebody else can be that ambassador.
So, but anyway, not as much travel.
I mean, honestly, what I would say is like, if I was ever happen to be traveling internationally, I would not do it
for a game.
No,
I would do it.
If I'm going halfway around the world, I'm going to do something different. And all the sites you'd see in those other countries instead of a football game.
I know what you're saying, but it's not like
I like football, but I'm not.
But you're acting like you're only going for you're acting like you're only going for a football game. Obviously, you're doing other things while you're there. It's just like another reason. It's a reason to go.
I would use that time.
If it was like a place where it was like, I've always wanted to go there. Like, yeah, I would go. I'd go catch a game.
You have
and
the
then
time
I'd
to spend like a whole extra week there. Besides,
I don't need a whole week. I'm talking like 4 or 5 days. It'll be fine. One day for the game, 4 days to do everything else. That's plenty of time. Obviously, you're not going to see everything. Like you can't even see everything in a week. You can't even see everything in 2 weeks. But you can see enough stuff to make it worth the trip, I think. But anyway, I will say there's one other travel thing is they do have to go from West Coast against Arizona to East Coast against Pittsburgh. So that's like one big jump that they have to do. And
they have a rest disadvantage that game as well.
Yeah, and then 4 of their last, like I mentioned, 4 of their last 6 are away, and 5 of their last 8 are away. So really long road stretch at the end of the season. But anything else you wanted to touch on the schedule, Dad, or should we move on to these deep dives?
They have a few primetime games.
Yes, they do. They have a Thursday night against Washington. They have a Sunday night against Dallas. They have another Sunday night against Pittsburgh, which might be, Rodgers' revenge game. I guess we'll see if he signs there by then. Maybe he'll still be waiting at that point.
Maybe he's like, not only do I not want to do the spring activities,
I don't want to play the first
or
4
training
weeks
camp.
Yeah,
I only want to play the second half of the year.
He's like, actually, I'm going to sign the week of that game. That's going to be the first week that I'm there.
That's going to ride in.
Yeah, exactly.
Just for that game.
It'd be funny. They have the Philadelphia game's a Monday night. And then they have the Thanksgiving game against Detroit. So those are their primetime games. And we don't know what 17 or 18 yet, and obviously
3 games TBD.
And they can flex everything after week 10, week 12. So there's a full possibility that could happen as well. So no guarantees there as to what's actually going to be primetime after about week 10. But Dad, let's get on to the most fun part, in my opinion, of our episode today, because, the schedule's interesting, but we already know who's playing. It's really just another excuse for the NFL to be in the, zeitgeist, I would say, is probably like the biggest reason for it.
They just want their name in the, but should I just admit, like, we spent all this time bashing the league for giving all this air to a reveal of a schedule that we already knew. We just talked about it for 18 minutes. Yeah.
No, 10 minutes, please. 10 minutes. We talked about Elton for a good 7 minutes.
We talked about Elton first.
But anyway, yes, we did talk about it for 10 minutes. But that being said, let's move on to the meat of our episode, which is Savion Williams and Micah Robinson. And Dad, let's start with Savion Williams. So Savion Williams, if you didn't know, Packers took with pick number 87 in the 3rd round. He was a wide receiver out of TCU, played there for all 5 years. He was the 12th wide receiver taken in this class. The consensus board had him at 96, so about where the Packers took him. Maybe Packers took him a little higher than that. Dane Brugler had him as their 14th wide receiver. He is 23 and a half years old. He'll be 24 by late November. And he's mostly been a receiver, but it is a little bit of an interesting thing because his last year at TCU, they used him kind of all over the place. They used him as a wildcat quarterback. They used him as a running back. But we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into his production profile. Dad, let's start off with Savion Williams as a, athlete, because that is probably I think the most interesting part of his profile is his athletic profile because he is a freak of nature. Oh, and I also want to mention he was a team captain. So that's another reason the Packers picked him is, locker room guy as well.
But it should give a little sort of initial reaction.
Oh yeah. Let's actually start with that. Yeah. So when he was picked, what did you think? That's a good point. So, what did you think about that?
I was really surprised they went with the second wide receiver here. I was not expecting that at all. I was like, okay, they got the wide receiver.
So was Brian Gutekunst, apparently. He said, I wasn't expecting to come up here and talk about two wide receivers, but
you act like somebody else made the pick.
And we talked about this when we did the entire draft breakdown right before we did the Matthew Golden deep dive. Was like, well, they watched that Philly game. And the problem was not the defense. the problem was the offense could not move the ball.
We need guys who could win one-on-one, which we're, we're against man coverage, we were not doing very well.
Which, I don't know if
last year
Savion Williams necessarily fixes that issue, but we'll talk about that in a second.
We'll talk about whether this is the best route.
But yeah, continue with your initial reaction. Sorry.
Well, just, so early on in the draft process, when I was doing my many, many mock drafts, I was taking him in the third round if Green Bay didn't get a wide receiver in the first or second. Then I started going more to players like Dante Thornton or Isaac Teslaw, who are speed, tall, fast receivers. Though Tesla ended up going even earlier. He went ahead of Savion. The other thing I noticed looking at the consensus boards, he was actually ranked one spot ahead of Belton on the consensus board.
Interesting. Oh yeah, that's right. Because he was 98, huh? I remember because we talked about
96 versus 97 or something like that. Yeah,
yeah. And my initial thought when they drafted him, and I'm probably gonna be a bit of a Debbie Downer in this episode. I was not a big fan of the pick. He's just not really the type of player I'm usually drawn to. I'm not a big fan of this, he could be the quote next Deebo Samuel, end quote archetype where it's I've seen Laviska Shenault, Malachi Corley, et cetera down the list. I just think that people have there've been a lot of misses on guys where they've tried to do this with these guys. And I just think Deebo Samuel is a one of one. I feel like he's I'm not a big fan of guys who are fast but not super quick, but the idea is that they're yak guys and they aren't they're breaking tackles, but they're not really great at making guys miss, and that you just have to get the ball in their hands to really get them usage and they need a lot of design touches, but what they do with those design touches is not really guaranteed because they're good in terms of running fast in space, but they're not as good in a phone booth. Is at least my opinion of Savion Williams. Is not as good in the phone booth, and there's not going to be as much space at the NFL level. You're going to be in tighter spaces, and so I was not super high on the pick personally. I also just don't. Well, we'll talk about it a little bit at the end as well when we talk about after we do our rest of our deep dive. But Dad, do you want to start us off talking about his physical profile? Because undeniably, he is a freak athlete. And I wish he had done more testing because he skipped a couple of things. But anyway, take it away.
Yeah, so because he skipped the jumps and the agilities, there's no official RAS. He didn't have enough testing. But he's a bigger receiver. He's 6'3" and 7/8", so 94th percentile height. It's not the tallest wide receiver under Gutekunst. That would be Lazard at 6'4" and 3/4", or Watson at 6'4" and 1/8". So those are the only two who are taller than he is who've played under Gutekunst. He's 222 pounds, 96th percentile. That'd be the heaviest wide receiver under Gutekunst. 32.5-inch arms, 67th percentile. Second only to MVS under Gutekunst. 10.25-inch hands, 94th percentile. Biggest hands under Gut. They've had a few players with, bigger hands, and it doesn't always correlate to catching the ball well. Watson, over 10-inch hands. Wicks, 10-inch hands. MVS, 10-inch hands. So if you're thinking, he's got big hands, He's got to really snare that ball. It doesn't always.
And we'll talk about that in a second because it did not always work well for him at TCU either, which we'll talk about.
But his hands are 94th percentile. His wingspan at 80 and 7/8 inches is 93rd percentile, and it's the widest wingspan of any wide receiver in the Gutekunst. For speed, his 40 time is 4.48, 71st percentile amongst wide receivers, but 96th percentile weight adjusted 40 time. 2.54 20-yard split, 74th percentile overall, and 94th percentile weight adjusted, and a 1.53 10-yard split, 74th percentile 10-yard split, 90th percentile weight adjusted. I mean, just to think about the weight adjusted, his 10-yard split is the same as Jaden Reed's. And the only players on the Packers who have better 10-yard split than his are Golden at 1.47, Watson at 1.45, and DuBose at 1.52. So he's actually, his burst in the first 10 yards is really good considering he's 222 pounds. On Player Profiler, we've got a 96th percentile speed score. Not enough for getting a full athletic score for him, but this, it also speaks to his size and speed. No agilities, no jumps. So we couldn't get a full RAS. But, what we did for Golden, we imputed a estimate of what his broad and vert would be using the average of all players within 5 pounds. So that'd be for Savion Williams from 217 to 227 pounds, and within 1 inch of height, so 6'2 and 7/8 to 6'4 and 7/8, and within 0.05 seconds in the 40, so between 4.43 and 4.53. And those jumps come out to be like a 35.5 vert and a 10-foot 2-inch broad, which then gives him an estimated RAS of 9.68. I can't remember how many players we had in that bucket. We had like 8 to compare Golden to, and I don't remember what the number of players we had to compare Savion Williams to guesstimate his jumps.
I think it was like 20 or so. But anyway, and I do want to be fair to him because I was like, I don't really like this archetype of player like the Laviska Shenault, the Malachi Corleys, et cetera, et cetera. And to be fair to him, Laviska Shenault was not as fast. He ran a 4.58, whereas Savion Williams ran 4.48.
4.48.
And so it's a whole 0.1 second faster in the 40. And for Malachi Corley, he's a good half a foot taller and like 15 pounds heavier. So it's like he's a bigger, faster version of those guys, which is why it might work because he's a better athlete than those guys are. But yeah, so I just want to be fair to him. Like he might be that archetype of player, but he's more physically gifted than those guys are.
Yeah, and you have some other notes on his.
Oh, yeah. He was on the Feldman's Freak List, which like Bruce Feldman puts together every offseason before the college football season begins. And essentially, it's like talking to programs around the country, like who's your best athlete, and he puts together a list of I think it's like 50 or so guys. Maybe it's a little more than that. But he puts together a list of guys who are like the biggest athletic freaks in the country. And he had Savion Williams on that this past offseason. And he had written down that he had a 600-pound back squat, a 355-pound bench press, which is just nuts, and a 350-pound power clean, which is also crazy. And then clocked 22.5 miles per hour max speed with GPS tracking while at TCU, which is insanely fast really in terms of top speed, especially at his size, which is, fast.
And surprised that he didn't do the bench in the workout, actually, considering he's putting up 355 pounds.
Yeah, I think that one might have been a medical exemption. I will double check that
like
really
a hand
quick.
Injury or something.
I believe, if I remember correctly, and I'll double check that Dane Brugler had that one down as a medical exemption, but the other ones were down as chose not to participate. No bench, medical exclusion, left shoulder. But then I don't know why he didn't do the jumps, the short shuttle, the 3-cone, because you'd imagine he would have done very well at them.
I would think the jumps at least.
And so
shuttle,
that's why I'm like
the
a little.
You could be like.
That's why I'm a little like, is it weird that he chose not to do them? Because like you'd think they'd be really good, and the only reason he wouldn't do them is if they weren't. But maybe, he just didn't have time to train for them because he did miss the last game of the season for the Horned Frogs, their bowl game, with an injury. it's one of those things where it's like unclear. It's like, hey, like, was he just like, a little banged up and wanted to sit out because you want to, make sure he gets that NFL money, which totally understand, very reasonable. Or was it like an actual injury that was really bothering him? We'll never know.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, for the player, it's never worth it for a player to do one of these tests if they're even the least bit unhealthy.
Yeah, and that's what happened with Xavier Restrepo, is like he wasn't feeling great apparently that day and chose to run it anyway, ran a 4.8, and then I don't think he ended up getting drafted. So it's like, so if you're not feeling up to it, don't do it. But at the same time, it is a bit of a question mark. It's like, you'd think he'd be good at the jumps. Why didn't he do them? But anyway, anything else on his physical profile you wanted to, the thing that everyone talks about is the comps. Because everyone and their mother is like, that is Cordero Patterson. That guy looks exactly like, because not only are they built the same, very similar speed, very similar usage in terms of what you look at, like how he was used, how Patterson was used with the Falcons, and like they also have the same hair. They have the dreads. Like they look very similar on the field, and so everyone is like, yeah, that's Cordero Patterson right there. And if they get Cordero Patterson in the third round, like.
That'd be great. They just have to learn from the Falcons that, who finally unlocked.
Like, that's a running back.
That's right. That's a running back.
Anyway.
Yeah. So Player Profile had Cordero Patterson as the number one comp, but the other sites didn't. Mock Draftable had Ben Skoranek and Tet McMillan as the top two, and then Alan Lazard was the fifth player listed as a comp, and RAS had Miles Boykin and Red Gump. I mean, I couldn't even tell you if that last guy was.
I was going to say Red Gump.
So I cannot vouch for that at all.
Yeah, and so we'll take their word for it that Red Gump is a real person and not some kind of AI creation. But yeah, he's a physical freak, and he's an interesting player. I'll say he's an interesting player. In terms of his production. This is where I think he gets even more interesting, because, like, obviously it's interesting to see a guy with that height, that weight, run that fast. It's certainly intriguing. And did you mention his 10-yard split? Because I think that's like the wildest part of his profile.
Yeah, I talked a little about how
it's the same as Jaden Reed's
at 30 pounds heavier.
Yeah, that was the part that really stood to me. I wanted to reiterate that
on the entire team. Yeah, just to emphasize that again is like, yeah, his burst at 222 pounds in the first 10 yards is the same as Reed's. It's the same as Bo Melton, who ran it for the 40 at 4.34.
Yeah. And so that's and really, like, the 10-yard split is, I mean, you're not going to be running a full 40 like most of the time, and we can, and that's interesting because, like, you can see his top speed is great because he clocked that 22.5 miles an hour. So it's like interesting that the 40 with his 10-yard split being that good wasn't even better. But anyway, you are moving a lot of mass, and he probably bulked up a little bit for the combine, you'd imagine. In terms of his production profile, just to touch on, I'm going to focus mostly on 2024, but his previous years in 2022, 29 catches on 44 targets, 392 yards and 4 touchdowns. In 2023, 41 catches on 64 targets for 573 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then 2024, so 2023, he was used pretty much as a like true traditional receiver, which we'll talk about in a second. And then 2024, though, he had 60 catches on 83 targets for 611 yards and 6 touchdowns. But he also had 51 carries for 322 yards and 6 touchdowns. So he was like kind of the entire focal point of their offense, which is like interesting. Like, some people have said, hey, they had to use this Wildcat stuff because, like, he was really gadgety. Like, 60 of those, even as a receiver, 60 of those 83 targets were under 10 yards in terms of air yards. 21 of them were behind the line of scrimmage. So, like, 20, like a quarter of his targets were like screen passes, swing passes, stuff like that, like checkdowns. In 2023, it was a bit more balanced. He didn't have nearly as many, behind the line of scrimmage, more traditional receiver. But it's what makes him weird because, he was a Wildcat quarterback. So talking about some of that alignment stuff. In 2024, he had 345 snaps wide, which 311 of those were on the left side. So, like, do we have a Zoolander situation with either him or the quarterback where, like, they can't turn one of the ways? I don't know, but he was only on the left side for some reason when he was wide. But anyway, 95 in the slot. So, like, some slot work, but not a lot. 38 in the backfield and 46 at quarterback, which, like, the way you hear people talk about him, you'd think it was going to be like 100 at running back and like 50 at quarterback. Like that was like primarily how he was used. And it's like, yeah, he was used a lot there, but like he was still primarily an outside wide receiver. So that's an important thing to note. Like he was not like mainly a like running back like a lot of people talk about it. He was still mostly. Sorry, go ahead.
How they count motion? Because a lot of times he motioned into the Wildcat quarterback position in some of the highlights I saw.
It's at the snap of the ball.
Okay.
Yeah. So if he motions and stops, I'm pretty sure it is. I am like 99% sure they do it at the snap of the ball. In 2023, though, much more traditional, 479 wide, 62 in the slot, just 6 in the backfield, 5 at quarterback. So, like, I just wanted to say that to note that he hasn't always been just a gadget guy. In 2024, it was really gadgety, a lot of targets behind the line of scrimmage. Because, like, even when he was a wide receiver, like an outside wide receiver, it was a lot of really short targets. Like, it was not very much, deep and intermediate. It was a lot of little screens, a lot of little touch passes, which, you could argue two ways. One, it's like, oh, wow, they were really trying to get the ball into his hands. Like, he was the focal point of the offense. It was like they just had to lean on him for everything. And in some ways, that's true. When you watch his, like, targets from this past year, it's like most fourth downs, it's like 4th and 1, it's like give him the ball in the Wildcat and let him go get a first down. 4th and 2, it's like get him the ball and let him go try and get us this first down. 3rd down, target him. Like, give him the ball because we need to get, like, when they had to have it, they were giving it to him a lot. On the other side of that, though, is an argument, or not an argument, but Dane Brugler said it's like the reason they did that is because they couldn't trust him as a traditional wide receiver to get open and to like make plays with the ball. And so it's kind of, you can be of two minds about it. There are positives and negatives in his profile. Let's start with the fun positives. He forced a lot of missed tackles, even as a receiver. So I'm taking out the running back stuff because it doesn't seem like that's how the Packers are going to want to use him. They have said that they mentioned Tyler Ervin, in terms of like maybe doing some like end around stuff with him, which I think is interesting. I personally like Jaden Reed getting those touches because he was so good at them last year, but we'll see what Savion Williams can do with those, and we'll talk about that in a second. But even as a receiver, he was tied for 14th in missed tackles forced per reception in 2024 amongst 117 qualified receivers at, 0.3 missed tackles forced per reception. So very, very good at the top of the class in that. And it was 7th amongst receivers in this class. I think Luther Burden was ahead of him, Tet McMillan, and Weeze also out of Mizzou. And there was one or two other guys that I forget. But 7th in terms of receivers in this class in terms of missed tackles forced per reception. And he was also top 20 amongst those 117 qualified receivers in yards after catch per reception. And so it's not just about the gadget stuff either. It's like, well, he's getting a lot of, forced touches, getting a lot of, behind the line touches, kind of sets you up to get a bit of a runway and be able to break tackles. Even in 2023, when his gadget usage was not as high, he was still top 30 in missed tackle force rate, so he was still breaking tackles even as more of a traditional wide receiver in 2023. So that is definitely a part of his profile that's fun and exciting. And the other thing about him is like, it's odd because it does not really align with his usage because he wasn't targeted deep that much this past year. He's like weirdly really, really good at contested catches, despite a guy who we'll talk about in a second has had a lot of drop issues during his time in college. But this past year, he caught 8 of 9 contested catch opportunities, which was the second best in the country in terms of contested catch rate amongst those same 117 receivers. And he was great at that. That was sticky all 3 years in college for him. 8 of 12 in 2023, 10 of 12 in 2022. He was really good at going up and mossing guys. And there's like some fun ones. The one against UCF where he like goes up and catches it over 2 guys in the back of the end zone is sick. He has a bunch of those on his tape that are a lot of fun. But now let's move over to the negatives. In terms of gadgety type usage, the Packers have said he is a receiver. He's going to be a receiver. He's not a running back. But that they did mention, some of the end around stuff with Tyler Ervin was kind of how they pictured maybe giving him some usage. Like they said, he's a receiver who can do some other stuff very well. But in terms of that, PFF only has him taking 1 end around jet sweep or reverse last year, and only 4 over the last 3 seasons, which went for a total of 9 yards. So he wasn't super effective with them either. And so if that's how you're going to use him in terms of the like quote unquote other stuff, he hasn't shown that he's very good at that, despite being pretty good as a running back and breaking tackles with the ball in his hands. So he hasn't been good at those end arounds. So that's something where it's a little bit of a question mark of like, how does that gadgety stuff actually work in the Packers offense? Because that's generally how they get the receivers those touches. So that's just something to keep an eye on. He hasn't been great with those. And then the big problem, which we know as Packers fans, he drops the ball a lot. He had the 5th highest drop rate in the country last year at 11.8%. Amongst those same 117 receivers. Now, I will say, if you want to give him some grace, 3 of those drops did come in the first game of the season. And if you were to just like, hey, let's just take out every stat from that first week against Stanford, just take that out, first week of the season, bit of butterflies, whatever. He'd be at 7.5%, which is closer to like 36th, like still, top half of the group and drops, still a good chunk of drops, but not quite as bad. And he was much better in 2023, just 4.7%. Like, that's not bad at all. That's actually quite good in terms of drop rate. But also in 2022, he was even worse at 14.7%. So he dropped a ton in 2022 and 2024 and was better in 2023. And so some people point out, it's like, hey, Matthew Golden had bad drop rates in 2022 and 2023 and then cleaned it up a bit in 2024. It's like, if you just like for Savion Williams, like he just had his good year the year prior and then a bad year in 2024. So you could make the argument that there's some similarities there. But, overall, drops were still an issue for him. He was 78 in the 78.4th percentile in terms of his whole career, drop percentile in college, which is just not ideal for a group that already led the league in drops last year. I don't know, like what kind of they think they're like, this is a market inefficiency, like guys who can't catch the football. But
well, I mean, if you look at the spreadsheet I made, it's like their players that they've drafted. There's not a single one who's in like the top 20, so it's like green for having a good drop percentage. Golden for his career, 32nd percentile. Williams, 26th percentile. Watson, 13th percentile.
You're doing it on the bad side. I was doing it on the
these are like the bottom.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is like how many people are worse than you. How many people are you better than? You're only better
how
than
many
32%.
people are you better than? Yeah,
only better than, and so Williams down to 26th percentile. Watson 13.
Yeah,
Wicks,
they got a lot of guys who
Wicks 8.6.
Yeah, the point is
39.
The guys they drafted this year are in the same vein as the guys they already have. Is that they have had issues with drops in the past, and hopefully they can put those behind them.
4 of the 12 that we have numbers for are above 50 percentile.
Yeah,
or
better than average at catching the football. Yeah, or not having drops at least. That's I guess a better way of saying it. But yeah,
so you might be right that this is like a market inefficiency. We can get guys who are generally better overall later,
have trouble, and we'll teach them how to catch later,
and we'll either deal with a few more drops or teach them how to catch the ball. But it does seem to be this is something how you get somebody who's actually a decent receiver in the 4th round or 5th round.
I mean, you say that, but it did not go well last year.
It can drive you a little crazy.
And it didn't go well last year, so it's like that is what it is. But anyway, hopefully they're able to clean that up this year, both, like we mentioned, Golden, but also Savion Williams, to get back to him. Hopefully he's able to clean that up. He's good at contested catches. It's just he does have some double catches where it's like he catches it and catches it again. He has some ones where it's like, he's just looking to turn up the field a little too quickly, looking to make the next man miss. And so that's like something where it's, focus, concentration. But
one other bit of hopium, the year that he was better was the year he was mostly just a plain receiver.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
true. As
true.
opposed to doing all the gadget stuff that the Packers...
In 2022, he was also, a plain receiver also, to be fair. That didn't go well then either.
Ancient history.
In terms of some other negatives, the advanced numbers don't love him. Only 23rd percentile in dominator rating, only 27.5th percentile in wide receiver OPS in his final season, only in the 30th percentile in CO, which is another advanced metric for receivers. His catch percentile, like with his ADOT, was also not great. So that's like keeping in mind, like, hey, like if you're catching a lot of passes behind the line of scrimmage, you should be catching most of those. And like guys who are like, getting a lot of deep targets probably aren't going to catch most of those. But that was only in the 7.5th percentile. So that's not great. The numbers were better in 2023, though, right? You had that down somewhere.
So those are the 2024 numbers, rather than the career numbers, which is what mostly I've put in for the receivers. But in 2023, he was 58th percentile in wide receiver OPS, 60th percentile in CIA, so above average both those, and 65th percentile for ADOT adjusted catch percentage. So 2023, his efficiency measurements were better, even though his overall production was not as good. And they gave him more volume by kind of making him part running back or wildcat quarterback. I feel like it was like more wildcat quarterback than running back, though they did give him some handoffs in the backfield as well.
It was pretty similar. In terms of like the actual carries that he got, I do feel like he got more carries at like wildcat quarterback, but that's also just because like whenever he lined up at wildcat quarterback, he was gonna carry. I think he threw one pass that I saw.
He has had two touchdown passes.
I only saw the one. It was to Besh against Baylor. That was the only one I saw. But maybe I'm forgetting one.
I feel like there was one more, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look.
But anyway, so yeah, but like this, I think it was similar snaps at quarterback and in the backfield, but anytime he had a snap at quarterback, he was pretty much carrying it. He did have one where like he took it out wide and then pitched it. I don't know if that was the plan, but it worked out. They got like an extra 5 to 6 yards.
Oh yeah, it was like running a old style
like speed option. Yeah,
quarterback.
It was kind of funny. But anyway, in terms of what scouts have to say about him, this was like one of those guys that I apparently was like that had the most mixed reviews amongst people in the league. But starting with Dane Brugler, who writes the Beast for The Athletic, he had him as his wide receiver 14, which we mentioned, but quote, a 3-year starter at TCU, Williams transitioned to a hybrid receiver role, which was, I guess, called the Frog package, as a super senior in offensive coordinator Kendall Briles' up-tempo spread attack. He split his 2024 snaps between wide receiver, exclusively to the left side of the formation and the backfield, as either a running back or wildcat quarterback. With just 23 targets of more than 10 yards, resulting in 9 catches, he was basically an extension of the run game on screens and slants. He also averaged 8 carries per game over the final 6 contests of 2024. A big, physically imposing athlete, Williams has some freaky traits that will tease playmaking flashes. He can play above the rim and has a knack for pulling in contested catches, but he needs to show better confidence in his hands and improve the details of his routes. Overall, TCU leaned into Williams' unique athletic profile in 2024, and the manufactured touches showcased his ability to create with the ball. However, the move came out of necessity because of Williams' inconsistencies as a traditional receiver. He projects as more of a, quote, joker weapon and needs a creative play caller who can utilize him in different ways, similar to Cordell Patterson, in parentheses there. And then Lance Zierlein of NFL.com, he wrote, quote, developmental wideout who offers an alluring blend of physical gifts and untapped potential. Williams is big, strong, and fast, but very raw as a route runner and is unreliable with his hands. His production is uneven as a traditional wideout, but he adds a dynamic kick to the offense as a gadget runner and as a catch-and-run option underneath. He excels on power sweeps and is willful enough for consideration on short yardage and goal line carries on direct snaps. The ball skills can be hit or miss, but there are flashes to work with on tape. The difference between, quote, siren song or, quote, pot of gold could rest in Williams' technical development and creativity of his play caller, end quote. So
here's a question. Is pot of gold at the end of a rainbow really better than a siren song? Because you never reach that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
I mean,
you never ever reach that pot of gold.
It's true. You just keep digging and digging and looking and looking.
Or you keep going and it keeps receding further and further away from you.
Yeah. In terms of what the Packers had to say about him, this is from Brian Gutekunst via Packers Wire. Quote, they moved him all around in different ways. I thought there was a little bit of a rawness to his game as far as the polish as a route runner and things like that. But his ability to create separation and get behind guys vertically and catch the football, all those things, I think, he just really seemed to fit what we're trying to do. His ability with the ball in his hands, obviously size as well. He's a huge man, but his determination, his ability, his elusiveness, his power, his ability to break tackles, I just thought those were the first things that stuck out to you, end quote. So that's what Brian Gutekunst had to say. But Dad, with all that said, with all those numbers, with all that production, with all that athleticism testing, what are your final thoughts on Savion Williams, the player, as we close the book on this portion of that deep dive?
So one thing I'd say, so I'm intrigued that there might be some upside here. And, you talked about how his breakout age or dominator rating were not very good. And I think part of that is like his final year, a good chunk of his usage was running the ball rather than receiving. So the dominator is really related to your share of the targets the receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. And so if you think about his share in the overall offense, it probably would, come to a better dominator rating than you get when you're only looking at receiving, since he had such a chunk of his production carrying the ball. And I'm higher on him than you are. I mean, going into the round, I would have preferred, a pass rusher or a corner, but a lot of the corners went between Belton and Williams. So the only one or the next one up was a player Rainstraw, who I originally thought was going to go much later, but had a really good athletic profile, or Upton Stout, and it could be that, the last couple picks before they picked Noel Williams, who was a corner I was picking a lot, and a lot of people liked, went 2 picks earlier. And if they wanted a nose tackle, Jamari Caldwell went just before. They could have gone with another nose tackle type of D tackle like CJ West or Deion Walker if they wanted to go a completely different direction instead of doubling up a wide receiver. And I don't think I would have hated that either.
Yeah, and they had mentioned that they when they picked Belton in the second round, they had thought about picking Savion Williams and thought that meant that they weren't going to get him. And then when he was there, they were very excited again. They say that every year. So, yeah. So it's,
you know what vibes that gives me when they say that?
What?
Amari Rodgers. I don't like the vibes.
They did say that about
I don't. They
Mario
said that
too.
about we thought we.
This
Man,
guy is
that's a bad combination.
Yeah, we'll see. But anyway, my overall final thoughts. I just don't know. I'm still not the biggest fan. Although I do think, after doing the full deep dive and watching all of his targets, I think he might bring a little bit more as a traditional receiver than I initially gave him credit for. And, I think the gadget stuff might be a little overrated in terms of what he can actually do at the NFL level when the spaces are a little bit tighter and he's not working with as much grass. But still, as a height, weight, speed guy, he's still intriguing. Like if you're taking a shot on like high ceiling, height, weight, speed guy, like he could still be that even without like the run after catch stuff if that's not able to translate. So you still have a high ceiling there. I will say, like, he's really raw as a route runner. He's not very good at getting separation. And, like, it's not like he's 20. Like, he's 23, almost 24 years old. He's been at a big program at TCU for 5 years. Like, I don't know how much progression you can really project at, like, the NFL level. Like, if he hasn't done it yet, like, what's to say? Like, what's to say he's going to do it now all of a sudden, now that he's in the league? Like, I don't know if I necessarily believe in that. And then I just would rather see Reed get the gadget touches they do have in the offense because I already feel like they don't give him the ball enough. And I just think he's a better player than Williams is, like, and probably will be a better player than Williams will be. And I just think that, more competition is good, I suppose, but he's a guy who's going to have to get design touches. Maybe there's a little bit more there with, his vertical speed and his contested catch ability that will be able to take the top off the defense. So there's something there possibly.
Maybe he'll give them a red zone threat.
It's possible,
because he's really good at contested catches in the end zone.
Yeah, but like goal line fades are bad. Like objectively, they're not good. I suppose. But anyway, so that does it for Savion Williams. Dad, let's move on to Micah Robinson. Pick number 237, the 27th cornerback taken. He was not in the consensus big board, which is, a bit of a surprise since it's a 712 player long list. In terms of, he was ranked as the 50th corner by Dane Brugler. He's 23 years old, just turned 23 though. Played 1 year at Tulane after 4 years at Furman. Pretty much exclusively an outside corner with 1,820 snaps outside and only 226 in the box and only 13 in the slot. So he's been only an outside corner. Dad, what was your initial reaction when this one was made?
Yeah, so when he got picked, I knew nothing about him. I had been looking for late round corners a lot. So I was happy to see Green Bay add an athletic flyer for depth because I think the cornerback room needed depth, not necessarily somebody at the top. And most of the cornerbacks, I had been picking a number of different ones in the 6th and 7th round, and they all ended up going to like the 3rd or 4th round. And so we're no longer available. So, to find somebody with his profile when they did, considering how the draft fell, I thought they did a good job anyway to see if he works out.
Yeah, and I wasn't surprised because they had him in on a visit. So, he was someone I kind of knew they seemed to be interested in. He was a late round guy, and late round flyer on corner should be able to give him some special teams value with his speed. They clearly liked him enough to bring him in for a visit. So I wasn't that surprised. I don't have a problem really with, like, there's no point in second guessing 7th round picks really. So it's like, I'm fine with it.
The Packers were his only top 30 visit.
Yeah. What is his physical profile though? Like he's a straight line speed guy, right? And like, he's not super agile.
He looks more linear. He's 6'7" RAS if you take the better of his numbers, which there's a little bit discrepancy depending on what source you go to. So I get his size, arm, and wingspan from his pro day, according to Dane Brugler. He's pretty small overall, 5'10" and 7/8, 52nd percentile. So I guess over the halfway mark. Only Jair and John Charles were shorter among Packers drafted corners. And only 183 pounds, 31st percentile. The lightest corner to be either drafted or even signed as a free agent under Gutekunst.
Yeah, he's small.
30 and 7/8 inch arms, 29th percentile. 8 3/4 inch hands, 20th percentile. 73 and 5/8 inch wingspan, 18th percentile. Those percentiles just keep going down. So he's tied on the team for the smallest hands, the shortest arms, and the shortest wingspan for a cornerback under Gutekunst.
Yeah,
but he's fast.
He's fast, though. He is fast.
Very good to elite speed for a corner. So 40 time, I got to so from his, according to RAS, from his pro day and what was originally released was a 4.38 40. That's 95th percentile. And if you just look over the last 20 years, it's still 91st percentile. Now Dane Brugler reports his 40 as 4.42, which you see in some place as well. That would be still 89th percentile and 80th percentile, just looking at the last 20 years. If you weight adjust his 40 time, it's down substantially to like 43rd percentile all time. His 20-yard split of 255 is 91st percentile, and his 10-yard split of 152 is 90th percentile all time. But weight adjusted is
he's lighter, so all those weight adjusted numbers aren't going to be nearly as good. But the thing with him is, like, you get him moving in one direction, fantastic. He has to turn, question marks.
Yeah,
what are his agilities, right? That's like the question mark of his athletic profile. That's like the big thing.
So overall, he's got slightly better speeds than the average cornerback that's played for Green Bay under Gutekunst. His agilities, however, are poor.
Really
average.
bad. Not just poor, like terrible.
Especially the short shuttle, 4.55, 7.9 percentile. That means the worst 8%.
Yeah.
And that's the worst for any corner under Gutekunst at Green Bay. But it was only 0.03 hundredths of a second worse than Keyshawn, and 0.22 worse, though, than the second worst draftee.
Yeah, and Keyshawn, though, is like a good 20 pounds heavier. So it's like, that's also something to keep in mind there. The 3-cone was a little bit better. You know, he was in like the 40th percentile on that.
13 pounds heavier.
Okay. But either way, the 3-cone was better, but still not fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, when you're comparing to like bottom 8 percentile, when you're
40th percentile looks a lot better.
39th percentile,
than
right?
That, yeah.
7.14 3-cone, 39th percentile. That's still the second worst on the amongst the team's draftees. Only to John Charles, but slightly better
than Nixon.
3-cone
by
than
a little
Nixon
bit
as well.
Yeah.
So in some ways,
which is like, how is Nixon
when you
good
look
at corner?
at Nixon's profile, actually,
he's like, why did this work? This should not.
Why
work.
Why was he a slot corner? He's actually
that too.
More straight line speed. Much better. Is actually, so the fact that he's working out better on the outside is not.
It's because it's the reason he was a slot is because he's a good tackler and because he's smaller. Yeah, like that's the big reason.
He's got a decent size and is a good tackler.
But in terms of back to Robinson, decent explosion, decent
jumps. His jumps are better. They're both above average. 35-inch vert, 56th percentile, and a 10-foot 3-inch broad, 70th percentile. Now, one thing I stumbled on when I was just trying to find out the news about his pro day is I found something posted by Real Analytics back on April 8th, which had him as a top 18 percentile in-game athleticism score with a 22.1 mile per hour on-field max speed, which they put as 96th percentile. And it's still like, if you just look at it, players who've made it to the NFL is like mid to upper 60s. 2.9 average yards of separation, 84th percentile, and 1.1 second average closing time, 81st percentile. So that was an unexpected find. It was like pleasant. So it sounded like when he's on the field, his athleticism is showing up. His comps on RAS, his top comp is Denzel Ward.
That's stunning to me. That's like absolutely shocking to me that
right?
they
it's like, okay, we got like one of the last 20 picks of the draft. Top comp is Denzel Ward. And then his other comps,
it's because Denzel Ward. I don't think he did any of the agilities. Right? Did he not do any of them?
Maybe he didn't do the agilities. So
I think that's why. I don't think he did any.
Now,
he didn't do the short shuttle or the 3-cone. That's probably why.
To be fair, if the flip side of the Denzel Ward comp is the next two, Tyreek Funderburk of Appalachian State and Mackinton Darlant. So if you guys have heard of these guys,
I've heard of Funderburk because of the name, but I could not tell you how well he's played. And
then Robinson's not even in the mock draftable database, so to get a comp from there. And Player Profiler didn't have a comp for him because they didn't have his testing numbers. So
he's a bit of a mystery.
No comp for him there either.
Yeah, and so like he's an interesting athlete. I think like his athletic profile kind of seems like it would fit well as a special teamer with all that straight line speed. Although him being a little bit smaller, I guess is a bit of a question mark there. How are you going to hold up to hitting guys that hard, every single game? But let's talk a little bit about what he looked like as a corner at Tulane. I'm only really going to look at 2024 because until 2023, he played at Furman, which is like a lower level of competition. And 2024 was really the year that probably put him on the map a little bit. Like you said, pretty much exclusively a boundary corner. In 2024, he allowed 22 receptions on 47 targets for 252 yards, 1 touchdown, but 2 picks, 4 pass breakups, and only 1 penalty. So that's not bad. It wasn't super grabby, so that's good. Out of 310 qualifying corners, these are like the numbers that I find most interesting. So of 310, so that's at least 300 snaps at corner was what I was looking at. So there are 310 corners that make that mark. He was 98th in yards per coverage snap, so upper third. That's pretty good. 136th in missed tackle rate. He had 6 missed tackles to 35 tackles, which not ideal, but a little bit above average at least. 43rd in catch rate and 44th in stop rate. So pretty good at, getting upfield. And that's something you see with him is he's pretty good at being physical upfield and, making plays on the ball as well. In terms of special teams, this is probably going to be where he's having to make his mark as a 7th rounder, as a corner, if he wants to get that last corner spot on the roster. He did only play on field goal block and very, very sparingly on punt return at Tulane. But he did play on kick coverage and punt coverage while at Furman and played all of those 4 very, very heavily while at Furman. So he has a good amount of experience at, special teams. And that's probably where he's going to have to make his mark. I would imagine that's going to be how he makes the team, as a 7th rounder.
And if you make the team, how are you going to be active on game day?
Yeah.
Is getting in special teams.
Exactly. In terms of what scouts had to say about him, quote, 5th year, this is from Lance Zierlein of NFL. Quote, 5th-year senior who spent 1 season at Tulane after transferring from Furman. He has NFL caliber top-end speed, but lacks the short area shiftiness to match slot targets, which might be something he's asked to do because he lacks ideal size. He was greatly improved in 2024 and is a tough run supporter when play flows his way. So solid. And then Real Analytics, quote, Robinson projects to be a dependable contributor who can provide solid production off the bench or in a rotational role. While Robinson may not develop into a starter, his immediate impact is valuable in situational play. So that's kind of what scouts had to say about him. Dad, that's kind of how you felt about that too, right?
Yeah, I think he's got some physical traits that make it worth trying.
It's a 7th rounder.
It's a flyer. This is what you're looking for as okay, this is, a lottery ticket. Let's see if we can, and you hope actually it's more of a roll of a dice than a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Because you got
depends how many sides are on that die though. I mean, and it's
you got a 1,000,000-sided die?
A 1,000,000,000-sided die, yeah. In terms of what the Packers had to say about him, this is from Brian Gutekunst once again via Packers Wire. Shout out to them for putting together a good selection of quotes. Quote, he's got great feet. He can play off-man coverage, which is one of the harder things to do. He took up a step from Furman to Tulane and really played really, really well in his first season there. So I think as he gets more reps against really better competition, I think he's going to continue to improve. He doesn't have elite size, but I thought his speed and his ability as an athlete to stay with guys, particularly from playing off coverage, which is so hard, and he's got great ball skills, end quote. So that's what Gutekunst liked about him. And then Micah Robinson also, they asked him about how his visit went with Green Bay. Quote, I had a great visit up there with them. Got to know the coaches, got to tour the facilities, loved everything about the culture, loved everything about Green Bay. Now I'm back. Sometimes it only takes one team to believe in you. Green Bay believed in me, so I'm here now, and I'm here to give everything I've got. Some lip service for the fans. We'll take it. But Dad, as we kind of wrap things up here with Robinson, what are your thoughts? I feel like for me, it's just 7th round flyer, athlete, should be able to play some special teams, maybe get in there in a pinch. He'll be competition for a corner room that needs competition. I don't really have any problems with it. I'm not super psyched up about it. It's a 7th round pick. I'm not going to delude myself and be like, oh, it's a massive steal. He's going to be a contributor day one. But, it seems like a guy who should be able to make the team on special teams and hopefully from there, parlay that into, developing as a player. As Brian Gutekunst pointed out, only played 1 year at top level competition, did pretty well. So there's a chance, he goes up to the NFL and keeps working at it and gets even better. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, and you feel like in terms of as far as flyers go, he's not as enticing a flyer as say Carrington Valentine was in the 7th round, who had a 9.34 RAS instead of 6.77. But he does seem to have some ability. Green Bay was his only top 30 visit, so maybe he was a little under the radar after start playing 4 years at Furman. That's possible why he maybe didn't get picked earlier. It's because of some of the on-field speed.
And he was also the corner 2 on his own team, with Ransaw going earlier.
Right, with Ransaw, who went as high as third round. It
was, or top of the 4th. It was either end of the 3rd.
No, it was 3rd round. It was the pick right after Savion.
Okay.
What I liked is that his best season, in both coverage and run defense, occurred when he moved up in competition from Furman to Tulane. It was by far his best season in overall defensive grade, coverage grade, and run defense grade.
Yeah.
And he looks to have some ball skills too, have an eye on the ball and plucking it or punching it away.
And there were a
passes
couple
or picking it off.
I was going to say there are a couple times where it's like he came off his man because he read the quarterback's eyes and went and made a play on the ball, which obviously you got to be careful about at the next level. But
yeah, you don't
want
to go for the cheese a little too quickly.
Yeah, but he's got some good instincts. It seemed like I did really like how physical he was when he came down and had to play the run, despite his smaller size. Now his missed tackle rate wasn't like elite or anything; it wasn't great, but
he's not afraid to get his nose in there. And
I think that's what you need for a special teamer. Carrier. You need a guy who's going to get in there and try and hit guys really hard. Makes plays on the ball.
Yeah, he
had a pretty good stop rate in college.
Punch the ball out and successfully a couple times.
Yeah, and made plays at the line of scrimmage. Like we mentioned, the stop rate was pretty good. Like it was like 40th out of 300 corners. Like that's really good. And so I think that profiles as a guy who should be able to make plays on special teams, isn't afraid to like come up in a straight line and hit guys while going full speed. And that's what you got to do as a gunner or like in the kickoff unit. So I could totally see him being a special teams contributor, and like that's all he needs to be for this to be a fine pick. Like, right? Like all he needs to be is a positive special teamer for the 7th rounder to be worth it.
As a 7th rounder, if you're active on game day and playing
successful
teams, that's a success. Yeah,
that's fine. A win. Anyway, any final things you want to say on Micah Robinson? Where would you rank him right now? Stack him up against the corner, because obviously right now it's Jair. I guess we'll see. Jair, Keyshawn, Nate Hobbs, and then Carrington Valentine, and then question mark, that 5th one. So the 5th one is really between Kalen King, Kamal Hadden, and him, probably, right?
Right. So it's between those three. Who is going to
get that 5th spot?
I don't know. I think I don't have a good feel for who to expect to have the lead in the locker room right now in that group of 3. But yeah, I agree that the 3 of them are fighting it out for that next spot behind Carrington Valentine.
Yeah, and that's going to be a thing to watch. And so stay tuned here, because we'll be talking all about that corner battle as well as everything else over the rest of the offseason. Still doing an episode every single week for the rest of the offseason. We'll be doing the rest of our deep dives, though, going forward, talking about Baron Sorrell, Colin Oliver, Warren Brinson, and the Udfas. Those are the other ones, I guess, etc. So we only have 2 more deep dive episodes to go. So check those out. Check out our other ones. Like we already mentioned, we already talked about Matthew Golden. We already talked about Anthony Belton, and we already talked about John Williams. So check those out previously. And going forward, we'll be talking about, what the rest of the league looks like, what the rest of the division looks like. We'll be talking about that going forward. Talking about training camp, talking about position battles, talking about what the offensive line room might shake out into. I think that and the corner room are the 2 that the corner room and the receiver room, I think, are the 3 that
there's
I'm
some
keeping
interesting battles for where players are in the depth chart.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll be keeping our eyes tuned, ears tuned, eyes tuned. Either way, we'll be keeping an eye on that all throughout the offseason. Like we mentioned, leave a like, subscribe, tell a friend. We'd appreciate it. Leave a comment. Check us out on Blue Sky at Father Son Packer for updates on new episodes, Packers roster news, et cetera, Packers related news. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.